The airport lounge smelled like citrus wipes and old ambition. She was standing by the espresso machine, black heels, navy suit, perfectly smooth hair like the kind you only get from those silent Dyson things. Everyone around her was scrolling, sipping, pretending not to exist. But I saw her. I saw everything. She reached into her bag, right side pocket, just below the worn leather edge, and froze. For exactly 3 seconds, she didn't move. Then she pulled it out, the velvet box. I saw her lips tighten. Her thumb grazed the lid like she wasn't sure if it would burn her. Then she noticed the paper, folded once, tucked underneath like a secret with a deadline. She looked around, not in panic, in calculation. Like this wasn't shock, it was damage control. I know this because I wasn't supposed to be there. She thought I was at home. She thought she'd boarded that flight alone, like she always did. But I had a one-way ticket, a fake name on the reservation, and a boarding pass to nowhere. I wasn't there to fly. I was there to watch. And when she sat down and unfolded that note, I saw her face shift into something I hadn't seen in a year. Not guilt, recognition. Because the note didn't say much. Just 12 words. You lied in Paris. The hotel staff told me everything. See, she folded it slowly, put the ring back in the box, sealed the pocket again like she was handling uranium. Then she grabbed her phone and dialed him. She didn't even hesitate. Just said, "We have a problem. He knows." I turned away before she could see me. But this wasn't over. Not even close. She didn't see me when she walked away. Or maybe she did, and decided I didn't matter anymore. I waited 38 seconds after she ended the call. I counted them. I always count when I'm trying not to scream. Then I stood up, careful not to draw attention, and followed at a distance just wide enough to stay in her blind spot, but close enough to read the anxiety dripping off her shoulders. She wasn't headed to her gate. She veered past it, took the escalator back down to arrivals. The flight to San Diego was boarding in 15 minutes, but she was walking like none of it mattered anymore. Not the meeting, not the clients, not the carefully curated version of herself she put on like armor. So I followed. She moved fast. Through the terminal, past baggage claim, into the parking garage where phone reception fades and things begin to look more like real life. Concrete, echoes, cold air. I didn't know what I expected. Tears, panic, a breakdown. What I got was worse. She walked to a silver rental car, definitely not the Uber she'd said she booked, and opened the trunk. That's when I saw him. He was already inside. Front passenger seat. Window cracked just enough for his voice to carry. "You said he wasn't a threat." And she, without even flinching, replied, "He's not. He's just loud." She dropped her blazer in the back, sat down in the driver's seat, and closed the door. I stood behind a pillar like a coward. A sweating, trembling coward. I wanted to run up and bang on the glass. I wanted to yell. I wanted to rip that ring back from her bag and say, "Explain this." But I didn't. Because I needed more than a confrontation. I needed the truth. All of it. Not just the surface-level lie she'd spoon-fed me the last few months. The migraines. The delayed flights. The overnight strategy meetings. I stayed until the engine started. I stayed until their car rolled out of the garage and into the open world where affairs become harder to hide and consequences multiply like fire in dry grass. I walked back to the gate alone. The flight to San Diego had already departed. Her name was still on the check-in screen, but her seat was empty, and the velvet box was still in her bag. She left it there like a message, or maybe a warning. Either way, I wasn't done. Next stop, Paris. I hadn't been on a plane in nearly 6 years, and now I was sitting in a middle seat between a screaming toddler and a man who chewed gum like it owed him money, flying to a city I once promised we'd visit for our 10th anniversary. Paris. But she went early. With someone else. For work, she said. Nothing romantic about PowerPoint and pastries. She joked when I asked her if it would at least be fun. I remember I smiled and said something like, "Bring me back a croissant." But in reality, I wanted her to bring me back herself. She didn't. Not fully. After the scene at the airport, I spent 3 hours pacing my kitchen like it had answers buried under the tile. I couldn't sit. I couldn't blink without seeing her face when she read that note, or hearing her voice through the car window saying I was just loud. So I opened her email. Not her work one. She had that under lock and key. I mean her old one. The one she forgot she left logged in on the iPad. Nothing juicy in the inbox. But the trash folder, that's where the ghosts lived. A hotel confirmation from 5 weeks ago. 2 nights. 2 names. Hers and someone named Dorian Kessler. Not a coworker. Not a client. I Googled him and nearly choked on my own tongue. He wasn't in marketing. He wasn't in beverages. He was a creative director for a luxury menswear brand based in Amsterdam. Married, allegedly. Children, allegedly. But what caught me cold was a tagged photo I found on his brand's Instagram. He and Lana, side by side at some rooftop launch party. Her hand on his chest, his hand at the small of her back. Just subtle enough to be nothing. Just bold enough to be everything. So I booked a flight. And now here I was, with stiff knees, a sour stomach, and a note burning a hole in my jacket pocket. I'd written her another one, just in case I saw her. Just in case I couldn't speak. Just in case she tried to lie and I froze up again. It read, I stood under your window. You never looked down. I arrived late. Midnight. The hotel was near Montmartre, tucked between a shuttered bookstore and a cafe that still had chairs stacked inside. I didn't check in. I just waited across the street, under a flickering sign that buzzed like it hated being alive. At 12:42 a.m., I saw her. She stepped out of the front entrance wearing a long beige coat I'd never seen before and heels I couldn't afford. Her hair was tied back. Elegant. Intentional. Like she was going somewhere that required secrecy, not celebration. And behind her, 10 seconds later, came Dorian. No bags. No hugs. No goodbyes. Just a look exchanged between them. Quick. Muted. Transactional. He walked one way. She walked the other. And I followed her again, like a ghost without a face, through narrow streets and soft rain and a world that still believed she was the woman I married. She didn't know I was there. She didn't know I'd left a second note. But she would soon. Because the next morning, the velvet box was no longer in her bag. She left it on the table of her hotel room, open, empty. And something told me it wasn't for me anymore. Paris looks different when you're not in love. The charm fades. The street musicians sound off-key. The smell of fresh bread just makes you sick because you forgot to eat. I didn't have a plan. I had a hotel lobby, a ring box in my coat, and a notebook full of times and places she'd mentioned offhand over the past 6 months. Restaurants, galleries, hotels, her work dinners. I'd always nodded like a good husband. Now I turned those names into a map of lies. She hadn't gone a half of them. The concierge didn't want to talk at first. He looked at me like I was either police or completely insane. Maybe I was both. I asked if Lana was staying in room 308. He said he couldn't say. I asked if Dorian Kessler had checked in. He shrugged, said, Monsieur, we respect privacy. But money still speaks French. I slid 2 bills across the counter, more than I could afford, and said, I'm not here to make trouble. I just need to know if she was ever alone. He hesitated, then nodded once. She was never alone, monsieur. But it was not always him. I froze. I said, excuse me? The concierge leaned in slightly and dropped his voice. There were others. A woman once. A man with a limp. An American, older. Not him. Not the tall one. I didn't respond. I just turned and walked away before my knees gave out. I went to a bench across the street and stared at nothing for 10 minutes. She'd lied. That much was clear. But now I was staring at the possibility that even the affair I thought I understood wasn't the full story. The next part feels like fiction. It's real, I swear to God, but I wouldn't believe me if I wasn't me. I took the metro south. I don't know why, something about the direction felt right. I stopped near the river and wandered into a bar that looked like it had survived 5 wars and didn't want to talk about any of them. I ordered an espresso I wouldn't drink. I pulled out my phone. I had no notifications. No missed calls. No texts. Not from Lana. Not from anyone. And then someone slid into the booth across from me. I looked up. He was in his late 40s, maybe 50s. Tan coat, leather gloves, not French. Something about him screamed New York. He said, calmly, You're Curtis, right? I didn't answer. I just stared. He pulled out his phone, scrolled, and showed me a photo. Me. Taken from behind. At the hotel the night before. Standing in the rain, staring up at her window. He said, You're not supposed to be here. I whispered, Neither are you. He smiled. Fair. But I was invited. I felt every muscle in my body turn to concrete. By who? He looked me dead in the eyes. Your wife. I didn't move. I didn't speak. My espresso was ice cold. He leaned forward. She needed a favor. A shadow. Someone to keep you from seeing what you weren't supposed to see. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. But instead, I said the only thing I could get out. Why? He stood up. Ask her. And then he left. I sat there alone for what felt like a year. The espresso cup shattered in my hand. I hadn't realized I'd crushed it. By the time I got back to the hotel, she was gone. Not checked out. Gone. And the velvet box was no longer on the table. It was on my pillow. Closed. But it wasn't empty anymore. I stood at the doorway of the hotel room, staring at the pillow like it had a pulse. The box sat there so deliberately, so casually, like someone had placed it with care, like it belonged there. But I hadn't left it. I never even made it inside that room. The concierge wouldn't let me near it. And yet, there it was. Closed. Clean. Undisturbed. Like it had been waiting for me to come back. I took one step inside, then another. The room smelled like her, lemon shampoo, perfume I couldn't name anymore, the faint trace of a hotel brand candle that was still flickering on the bathroom sink. She'd left everything behind. A scarf on the chair. A half-empty glass of red wine. The bed wasn't even made. But that box was wrong. Because I hadn't packed it like that. I sat on the edge of the bed and picked it up. My hands were shaking worse than they had been the day I proposed to her. I remembered that day too clearly. Kneeling on frozen ground, the air turning my words into fog, and her eyes, wide and still honest. Or so I thought. I opened the box. Inside was the ring. But it wasn't our ring. It was the same shape, yes. Same velvet case. Same antique gold band. But the stone? It was different. Ours had a tiny chip near the base. I remember because I dropped it during the proposal. This one, flawless. Smooth. Too perfect. Almost new. I lifted it. It didn't feel the same. It was lighter. Colder. Soulless, somehow. And underneath it, there was something folded. A photo. I unfolded it slowly, and what I saw made my mouth go dry. It was a picture of Lana. But not like I'd ever seen her before. She was standing in front of a mural in what looked like Mexico City. She'd never mentioned being there. And she was holding hands with someone. Not Dorian. Not the man in the bar. Someone else entirely. A woman. Younger. Smiling like she'd won something. Lana was in sunglasses, but I knew that expression. It wasn't staged. It wasn't business. It was joy. Private joy. On the back of the photo, in Lana's handwriting, it simply said, "You were never supposed to look this deep." I sat in that room for what must have been 3 hours, staring at the photo, then the ring, then the room, trying to make them all belong to the same story. But they didn't. They belonged to different versions of her. Of us. And I was just now realizing I'd never actually known which one I married. Eventually, I left the room. I took the box, the photo, and her scarf. I didn't go back to my hotel. I didn't eat. I just wandered until the sky started bleeding gold. Around 7 p.m., I got a message on Signal. I didn't even know she had me on Signal. No name. Just a number I didn't recognize. The message said, "You're not going to understand what's next. But don't follow me again." That was it. No, I'm sorry. No explanation. Just a warning. Or a threat. Or maybe a gift. I didn't know. But I responded. I wrote, "I never followed you. You just stopped looking behind you." No reply. And still, that box was in my pocket. But the ring inside didn't belong to me. The photo didn't belong to me. And now, not even the story I was living in felt like it belonged to me. Because what if this wasn't about infidelity? What if this was something else entirely? I didn't go back to Minnesota. I was supposed to. My return flight left 2 days ago. I watched the time pass on my phone like I was expecting someone else's life to show up and drag me home. But I stayed. I stayed because leaving felt like agreeing that I'd seen enough. That the story was over. But nothing was over. In fact, I wasn't even sure the story had actually started. And the more I tried to trace a beginning, the more I realized I had no idea where Lana began and where she just inserted herself into my life. I didn't sleep much. Just walked. Day and night blurred together. Sometimes I'd find myself staring at strangers on the metro, convinced I'd seen them before. Sometimes I'd check my phone expecting messages that never came. I stopped trusting my memory. Stopped trusting the photos on my camera roll. Half of them felt staged, filtered, not by software, but by her. Posed, smiled, sculpted into a version of us I wanted to believe. I kept going back to that photo I found in the box. The one of Lana holding hands with the woman in Mexico. The more I stared at it, the less I understood what bothered me. Until one night, around 3 a.m., sitting in a laundromat near Republic, I saw it. In the background of the photo, barely visible behind the mural, was a reflection. In a window, a figure holding a phone, half hidden, half obscured. It was me. Same coat. Same way I hold my phone. Same blur of my face. But the photo was dated 2 years ago. That made no sense. I hadn't been to Mexico. I hadn't known about that trip. She told me it was a brand conference in Atlanta. And back then, I believed her. We were still happy then. Or so I thought. So how the hell was I in the background of a photo I'd never taken, from a place I'd never been, during a time I thought we were together? I printed the photo and brought it to a print shop near the Seine. Paid extra to have it blown up and sharpened. The guy behind the counter asked if I was working on an art project. I said yes. It was easier than explaining I was trying to disprove the shape of my life. When the print came back, it confirmed what I feared. The figure in the reflection wasn't just someone like me. It was me, down to the scuff on the corner of my phone case. A detail so small no one would ever fake it. Not even Lana. But here's the part that nearly made me vomit on the sidewalk outside. The timestamp on the metadata from the original file. When I checked the scanned version, it said April 17th, 2023, 2:11 p.m. That was the exact time, down to the minute, that I was in an all-hands meeting at work. I remember because that was the day I got passed over for a promotion, and I'd come home furious. Lana had made me dinner that night. Candlelight. Wine. She told me I deserved better. That night, she cried. Now I think I know why. Because she was already living 2 lives. And maybe, just maybe, I was part of both. Or worse, neither. I sent the photo to a friend of mine back in the States. Sam. He's a tech forensic specialist. We hadn't talked in months, but I told him it was urgent. I didn't give him the context. Just asked if there was any way the image could have been manipulated. I didn't hear back until 24 hours later. His message was short. Kurt, I checked everything. That reflection wasn't added. You were there. Wherever that was, you were physically there when this was taken. Then he added one more sentence. But I don't think you remember because I don't think she ever wanted you to. I didn't respond. I just sat there, in a foreign city, holding a photo of my wife with someone else, and a version of myself I couldn't even remember being. And that's when I knew. This wasn't about cheating. It was about rewriting. It took 4 days, and every ounce of shame I had left to get it. The address. I found it written in the back of a journal I once gave her. The leather one, the one she never used. Or so I thought. I'd brought it with me to Paris without even knowing why. Just stuffed it into my backpack like a token of a time when I thought I mattered more. At some point, while flipping through pages filled with nothing but blank lines, I caught sight of the imprint, pressure left by handwriting on the next page. Barely there. Invisible until I tilted it toward the light, just right. 27 Rue de Trois Frères. I googled it 3 times. Once on incognito. Once in French. Once just to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. It wasn't a hotel. It wasn't even listed publicly. Just a beige door with no nameplate, wedged between a shuttered tobacco shop and a laundromat that only took coins. The kind of door that wants to be ignored. The kind of place people go when they don't want to be seen. Or remembered. I waited outside until after dark. Just watched. I saw no one enter. No one leave. At 9:17 p.m., the door buzzed open on its own. A man walked out, mid-30s, wearing a scarf even though it was warm. He didn't notice me, but I noticed the tag on the bag he was holding. L. Kessler. That wasn't Dorian's last name. It wasn't even Lana's maiden name. I didn't recognize it at all, which meant she was using a name that didn't belong to her. I waited another hour before I got close enough to test the buzzer. There was no keypad, no speaker, just a single silver button. I pressed it once and counted to 20. Nothing. Pressed again. Still nothing. But then, as I was turning to leave, the door clicked open. I walked in. The stairwell was tight and dark, walls scuffed by decades of luggage, feet, and secrets. I climbed slowly, listening for voices, for music, for anything. By the time I reached the 3rd floor, I heard it. A piano. Soft. Uneven. Not practiced, not polished. It was the tune of a lullaby I'd heard once on a YouTube video about sleep cycles. But she was humming with it. Off-key. Familiar. Like she meant to sound like someone else. The door was cracked. Just enough for a sliver of light to bleed into the hallway. I could see her silhouette. She was alone. Sitting at a small, upright piano in a silk robe. Not hers. barefoot, hair wet. Like she'd just taken off someone else's skin and hadn't quite decided what to put back on. I didn't say anything. I just stood there and listened. And then she spoke, without turning around. I was wondering when you'd figure out this one. Her voice was calm, not surprised, not afraid, tired maybe, but more like someone exhausted by how slow I'd been. I stepped in. She didn't move. You lied about Mexico, I said. She nodded once. That wasn't hard. You lied about the man in the car. Which one? I hesitated. Why did you leave the ring for me in the hotel? She finally turned. And her face. God, I'll never forget that face. Not guilt, not cruelty, but pity. She looked at me like I was something small. Not pathetic, not worthless, but irrelevant. You were never supposed to find that ring, she said. You were supposed to burn it. Like I asked you to. I didn't know what she was talking about. You never asked me that. Yes, I did, she whispered. 3 months ago. In the car. Outside your therapist's office. Don't you remember? My blood went cold. I've never been to therapy. She stood up, slowly. Walked toward me barefoot across the floorboards like she was floating. Curtis, she said softly, you have. You just didn't stay long enough to finish remembering. She handed me something from the drawer by the piano. A patient intake form. My name, my address, my signature. Dated January 12th. Your reality's been bleeding out for a while, she said. I just stopped cleaning it up. I opened my mouth to ask something. Anything. But she touched her finger to my lips. There's one more thing you need to see, she said. Then you'll know if this is your story at all. She walked to the closet, unlocked a safe I didn't see at first, and pulled out a tablet. On the screen was a folder. Labeled, Curtis Alt 2/final version. I stared at it. She didn't say a word. Because by then, she didn't have to. The screen glowed softly in the dark apartment. My hand hovered over the folder like it might shock me. The title, Curtis Alt 2/final version, felt sterile, mechanical, like a mislabeled project file on someone else's computer. Lana sat across from me, hands folded like she'd done this before. Like she'd watched people fall apart in front of this screen and then decide whether or not they wanted to put themselves back together. I tapped it. Inside, there were videos. Dozens. Short clips. Some of me, but not me now. A version of me thinner, younger, a different haircut, different clothes, sitting in a white room. Talking, laughing, arguing, sometimes crying, sometimes with Lana, sometimes with someone else I didn't recognize. My voice was softer in those clips. Not weaker, just newer. Like it hadn't calcified into the version that spent months questioning every moment of his own marriage. And then there were files. Transcripts. Notes. Medical records. Even a therapy log with my name and an official header from a facility in Belgium I'd never heard of. Subject, Curtis V. Early-stage memory fragmentation due to immersive delusion cycle. Triggered by loss event. Response tailored by partner through behavioral intervention protocol. Loss event. I turned to Lana, heart thudding in my ears. What did I lose? She hesitated. The longest pause I'd ever seen live inside someone. Then she said, me? I didn't speak. 3 years ago, she continued. There was a car accident. You and I were driving back from a wedding. You were okay. I was not. She stood, slowly, as if the memory physically hurt. You couldn't let go. Your mind rebuilt me. It gave you a version you could keep. One that lied, yes. One that cheated. One that ran. But that version was safer for you than admitting I was already gone. My knees gave out. I sat back down. I was trying to breathe through a hole that didn't exist anymore. All of this, I whispered. Paris? The apartment? Dorian? That man in the bar? She smiled, softly, not cruelly. Constructs. Based on real people. Names you overheard. Faces you passed on the street. Your mind just filled in the rest. I only stepped back in to help guide you out. I buried my face in my hands. It was too much. It felt like drowning, but without water. Like grief had worn a mask and finally took it off. But then, I looked up. She was still there. And this time, she wasn't the manipulative stranger in a robe. She was her. The Lana I loved. The one from the beach in Duluth. The one who laughed when our tire popped on our first date. The one who held me when I got that phone call about my dad. She wasn't back, not in the real sense. But she was here, in front of me, because I had finally let go of the version that hurt me. The one I'd built just to keep her alive in the most broken way. She walked over, placed the velvet ring box in my hand again, and said, "You don't need this to remember me. You never did." I didn't cry. Not right away. I just nodded. And then she was gone. Not in a tragic, sudden way. Just gone. Like a sunrise fading into morning. I woke up in a room with white walls. A nurse smiled gently and said, "Welcome back." I was back in Minnesota 2 weeks later. Spring had just started. The snow was finally giving up. I went for long walks without a destination. I started journaling, for real this time. No hidden messages. No invisible ink. Just ink and truth. Sometimes I visit the lake where Lana used to read. I bring the ring. I don't wear it. I just hold it and sit in the quiet, letting the breeze fill the spaces where pain used to live. And you know what? I'm okay. I'm not perfect. I still forget things. I still hear songs that make my stomach twist. But I remember her now. Clearly, honestly. No illusions. No edits. Just Lana. Just love. And finally, after all of it, just peace.